Good morning. I'm Bonnie Gardner, co-chair of the Public Affairs Forum of the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Austin. Our forums are scheduled for Sundays at noon, most Sundays, and they're free and open to the public. We encourage you to attend. We're located at 4700 Grover Avenue. Our mission is to nurture the mind and the spirit and serve social justice. For more information on our forum programming, you can go to our church website at www.austinuu.org. And now Richard Halpin is going to introduce Leslie Poole, today's speaker. Richard?
Thank you, Bonnie. Good morning, everybody. Once in a while, a person comes along who works as a volunteer in several different community efforts. They see the way things are, and they want to make things better. They believe they really can make a difference, and they're also genuine people. They are honest, smart, and think about others before themselves. They put service before self. They have integrity. Our speaker today is one of those people. Councilmember Leslie Poole ran on a campaign that promised to make improvements in our local government. One area of Councilmember Poole's focus was and is our environment. As you know, catastrophic weather events are happening everywhere. Now we need someone who can help make a difference. Thanks to her, Leslie Poole, and her progressive colleagues, we now have one of the best citywide climate protection plans in the nation. She was a major force in achieving the historic council vote to purchase close to 600 megawatts of solar energy for Austin. And she continues to fight to make Austin Energy more responsible to the people that own the utility, that is, the citizens of Austin. We have a council member, Leslie Poole, who gets the climate fix we're in and is dedicated to doing something meaningful about it. Ladies and gentlemen, will you join me in a jubilant welcome for council member Leslie Poole?
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, everybody. I am really humbled by that introduction, and it is so lovely to see so many friendly, smiling faces on a gorgeous Austin Sunday morning. So thanks for having me here today. I'm happy to report to you on my first year on the Austin City Council. It's a distinct honor and a serious responsibility to serve as the District 7 representative, and I thank each of you for your support, good counsel, and insights on the incredible range of issues that we face locally and globally. In our first year, this council had many successes on a range of issues, on the environment, on the budget, on good government issues. So here's a snapshot of items on the work plan that I devised during the budget. We restored Austin libraries to pre-recession service levels and invested more than $1 million new monies into our parks across the city. I was able to secure $350,000 for important repairs in the pool area, specifically at the Beverly Sheffield Northwest Park just up the road, in addition to the $1 million in new money. I led on the Healthy Foods Initiative during budget, passed resolutions to introduce electronic filing for campaign finance reports, which was a first for the city, and for a beefed-up ordinance requiring lobby registration. This council also achieved agreement in the long-simmering labor dispute between city management and the Austin firefighters so that we're no longer operating under a consent decree. That was one of the first major decisions and actions that was taken by the council almost a year ago. We also made major strides on solar. In advance of the UN Climate Conference, Council adopted and implemented the City of Austin's climate plan, and this plan, along with our decisions relating to solar purchase and the upcoming debate on the gas-fired coal plant, will continue to lead us forward in our commitment to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions. One of the highlights of my year personally was the opportunity to participate in the Climate Summit talks along with Mayor Adler and County Commissioner Shea. It was a unique opportunity to meet with colleagues from across the globe to talk about issues that affect us all at the local levels. Not only did we learn from others, but we brought the Austin story to a bigger stage. One of the themes of the climate talks was the decision we make today will shape tomorrow. Fully a third of the global safe carbon budget will be determined by urban policy decisions in the next 5 years. And that's a statement not just from me, but from the Climate Leadership Group, or C40, and that was made in October 2015. It was a distinct honor to be invited to attend the conference with Mayor Adler and Commissioner Shea. I was present at a number of key events that, taken in whole, and along with the international efforts of municipalities and non-governmental organizations, literally from around the globe, prepared the groundwork for the agreement that was ultimately struck on December 12, 2015. I was back home by then, of course. I attended sessions in the first week of the 2-week conference, and as karma would have it, I was writing a blog post for publication in the Austin Eco Network. I was sitting in my kitchen with the final proceedings from Le Bourget streaming on my laptop. Around 1 o'clock our time, 1 in the afternoon, which in France, 7 hours ahead, was 8 o'clock in the evening, I heard the clear relief and gratitude in the voice of French Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Development, Laurent Fabius, and I believe I'm saying that properly. He announced, "We have an agreement." It was indeed a relief and a cause for real celebration. So a little bit of background, much of which you're likely aware about the Conference of Parties, or COP. What's it all about? The international political response to climate change began at Rio Earth Summit 1992, where the Rio Convention included the adoption of the UN Framework on Climate Change, affectionately known as UNFCCC. This convention set out a framework for action aimed at stabilizing atmospheric concentration of greenhouse gases to avoid what they termed dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system. The UNFCCC entered into force on March 21, 1994, and today has a near universal membership of 195 parties. The main objective of the annual Conference of Parties, or COP, is to review the convention's implementation. The first COP took place in Berlin in 1995, and significant meetings since then included COP3, where the Kyoto Protocol was adopted, COP11, where the Montreal Action Plan was produced, COP15 in Copenhagen, where an agreement to success for the Kyoto Protocol was unfortunately not realized to the chagrin of many of us, and COP17 in Durban, where the Green Climate Fund was created. And so leading up to COP21, the 2015 Paris Climate Conference, there were high hopes and expectations that for the first time in over 20 years of UN negotiations, we would achieve a legally binding and universal agreement on climate with the aim of keeping global warming below 2 degrees centigrade. France played a leading international role in hosting the conference, and COP21 was one of the largest international conferences ever held in that country. It's reported that nearly 50,000 participants, with 25,000 official delegates from government, intergovernmental relations, and organizations, UN agencies, NGOs, and civil society attended. Not only were governmental and NGO entities in attendance, but business and industry were there too. At the Sustainable Innovation Forum, also has an acronym, and that's SIF 15, the largest business-focused event held during COP. They explored the role of private sector innovation and investment in developing sustainable urban communities. They discussed adapting and innovating solutions for urban areas, which technologies and approaches are being currently adopted, leveraging municipal investment streams to create viable business opportunities, and building long-lasting public and private partnerships to innovate city design. Urban mobility, sustainable development were topics of discussion, as was forestry, water, the future of climate finance. The last session, Climate Finance, this one looked at understanding the financial landscape around low-carbon investment, how to fund leading-edge energy projects, and shift the global culture away from petroleum-based systems toward alternative renewable fuels. The UN talks took place at Le Bourget, and the C40 forum sessions were at Paris City Hall. At Le Bourget, the exhibit halls were massive. I walked just a small part, and I brought with me today some documents and information from various countries and organizations, all of whom came together to push the UN negotiators toward agreement. On that back table, you'll see, just for you to view, there's not enough for everybody to take, but I brought the documents from a number of different countries on their initiatives. I have some from the Mediterranean areas, from Australia, from Sierra Leone. Very interesting, the different innovations and projects that countries literally around the globe are taking underway. Not only were the innovations on display at Le Bourget, but along the Champs-Élysées, you could see efforts to reduce carbon emissions and create energy with people energy. Stationary bicycles, treadmills, and swings were set up so anyone could climb aboard and run, pedal, and swing and put their physical energy into lighting up the boulevard. And the plaza at the grand entrance to Paris City Hall, called Le Ville de la Cité. And I will tell you, I took French in college, and it was really, it was an opportunity for me to try it out in Paris, and I had heard that Parisians maybe looked askance a bit at especially Yankees coming in and trying to speak French, but I will tell you, 201, they were entirely gracious and very helpful, and honestly, they all speak English really well. So it all went really well. So the plaza at the Paris City Hall was full to bursting with a variety of creations and inspirations on the greening of our planet, from green roofs to underground heating and cooling systems to intelligent photovoltaic generators. The creative minds and, I'm guessing, venture capitalists worldwide put their interesting innovations and ideas on display, all in aid and to support the goal of ensuring agreement, which was to limit the rise in temperature to less than 2 degrees centigrade. And you know from listening to the conversations leading up, there was incredible enthusiasm and support built over the 5 years from the last COP in order to make it nearly impossible for the UN negotiators to decline to endorse the agreement. But I will tell you, even up until Saturday when I was sitting in my kitchen listening, it was not a certainty that agreement would be reached, which was why the celebration was so incredibly sweet when it was. So, the Paris Agreement marks a change in direction towards a new world. It confirms the target of keeping the rise in temperature below 2 degrees centigrade. Scientists believe, and so do I, that a greater increase in temperature is very dangerous. The agreement even establishes for the first time that we should actually be aiming for 1.5 degrees centigrade to protect island states, which are the most threatened by the rise in sea levels. So very quickly, how can we manage to avoid global warming? By December of 2015, December 12, 186 countries had published their action plans. This was the effort that led up to COP21. 187 countries had committed to reducing their greenhouse gas emissions, and there was large-scale mobilization of heads of state based around the issue of climate. You may not have seen it so much in evidence necessarily in Texas, but I will tell you that many countries are far ahead of us in understanding the wide range effects of global warming. Leaders were involved up to the highest political level, from the Ivory Coast to Japan, to Kenya, Argentina, Mexico, Colombia, Gabon, and Iceland, to name just a few. And I met representatives and officials from all of these countries. Each of these plans set out the way in which these countries intend to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. The UN body that deals with climate change, which is the UNFCCC, published an evaluation of the contributions before the conference started in November of 2015. At the last climate conference in Lima, which was COP20 in late 2014, it was decided there that each of the 195 states would have to set out their roadmap to limit the effects of global warming to less than 2 degrees centigrade by 2100. And that was the effort that led up to the conference in Paris in December. Their study showed that despite the unprecedented mobilization shown by these states, At this rate, global warming will still be between 2.7 degrees centigrade and 3 degrees centigrade. In other words, above the threshold set by the scientists. So recognizing this, the Paris Agreement asks all countries to review their contributions every 5 years, beginning in 2020. They will not be able to lower their targets. In fact, they are encouraged to raise them. In addition, emissions should peak as soon as possible, and the countries will aim to achieve carbon neutrality in the second half of the century. This is a real turning point. We're going to gradually stop using the most polluting fossil fuels in order to reach this goal. The agreement is open for signing by the countries on April 22nd in New York City. The agreement can only, what they call, enter into force once it's been ratified by 55 countries, which represents 55% of the emissions. So that's a quick wrap of the work that was done at the UN Climate Conference. The mayor and I will be meeting soon to plan a larger debriefing of our time there, and I ask you all to stay tuned for details. I'll be sure to make sure that you all know about it. So I'd like to end by noting 4 items to look for that I would ask you to pay attention to locally. The first one is the combined cycle gas-fired coal plant, and the decision council will make on whether to engage in building that. My support, of course, is expanded solar, and you may know that I oppose the combined cycle coal-fired gas plant. We will need all your efforts in order to turn that corner. I am encouraged by the fact that the mayor went with me to Paris, and the inspiration and the knowledge that was gained there, I believe, will have far-reaching results in our decision-making on the council. Second one I bring to your attention, Balcones Canyonlands and the issues surrounding the warbler study. I don't know if anyone saw the newspaper this morning. It was a very troubling article to read about the hand that the state government is having in rejecting the publication of a scientific paper that was written by Lisa O'Donnell, who is on the staff of the Balcones Canyonlands Preserve. And as you know, I sit as a City of Austin representative to the BCCP. It sounded like from what I read that the state controller, or the former state controller, Susan Combs, is attacking the preserve. She is looking for ways to remove its protections. And my guess, her ultimate goal is to open that land for development that would have serious negative effects on all of Austin and all of the surrounding communities where that land is adjacent and touches. There are so many other cascading results of that as well, from the fly zones for the birds and the insects that come up from Mexico and go north and west. We are a major corridor for transit for migrating fowl. So have a look at that newspaper article and stay abreast of what's happening with the Balcones Canyonland Preserve. I don't even have to mention to y'all at SH45 Southwest, which is an ongoing concern of ours, and I believe it has. There is a suit has been filed by SOS against the CTRMA. Once a week watering. I would like you all to weigh in on your concerns or your opinions on that. The city will make a final decision on this issue, I believe, in April. I will just say, as an addendum to that item, I look at our water resources much the same way. Folks who pump oil and gas look at their resources. It's a finite resource, and we actually can't do much to replenish it. That's all left to nature to do for us. It was a huge wake-up call, I think, for all of Central Texas to see how low our lakes got. And it wasn't until earlier this year that they had filled up. They're full now. We can't rely on that for any long-term planning. We have to plan for shortages. So I will tell you that I support once a week lawn watering. There are some in our community who don't. So it will be, it won't be an easy vote at council, in other words. And I'll just also say as an aside, when I took office, having worked so long on so many social justice and civic issues, with a progressive angle on them. There were a number of things that I thought would not be controversial on this council, but they turned out to be. I found myself fighting to keep recycled reeds open and operating on Burnett Road. Go figure. And the fourth one is the remanufacturing hub that Austin Resource Recovery has rolled out, that plan. It's a strategic investment to build a plant in Austin so we can convert our recyclable commodities into a financial resource, and that supports the city's long-range and long-term efforts around recycling. Generally, you may have read in the Statesman, there are critics of our recycling policy, and they said, well, it's not making money. And the Statesman published a rebuttal opinion piece that I wrote on December 30th. Basically, as stewards of our environment, it's not always about making money. And the critics entirely overlook the cost of landfills. It's over $50 million to make a landfill. So that's not only real dollars, but there's pollution to our air, land, and water. There's an increase in vermin. There are transportation costs. And the overall reduction in the quality of life for anyone who lives near a landfill is severely reduced. I applaud Austin Resource Recovery for their innovative thinking on creating the remanufacturing hub. So I would just end with a quote from Helen Keller, who, when I was a girl, I had a biography of her, and I was fascinated by how she overcame serious disabilities, and I even learned rudimentary, kind of like my French, how to fingerspell based on reading a biography of Helen Keller. But she said, "Alone we can do so little. Together we can do so much." So thank you all. So that's it for the remarks that I had prepared to make. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Well, we're going to have some lively discussion, I think, today.
On the once-a-week watering.
Yes.
I've talked recently with some of the folks at Austin Water, and they say that the feedback at this time is for twice-a-week watering, and surprise, it's coming from the suburbs and particularly from Don Zimmerman's district. So go to speakupaustin.org. I am hearing that they are getting very little feedback at this time. They need more. Speakupaustin.org is where the survey is. It's a quick survey, a brief survey. Speak up for Austin and water conservation, please.
Thanks, Roy. And I endorse that, absolutely.
Hi. In last Monday's Statesman, there was a list of area transportation projects. Over 90% of the spending was for roads. Less than 10% together went for rail, pedestrian, and bike. And is there any chance of inverting those proportions?
Thanks, Bill. That's a really good question. Was that the Campo plan, the 2040 Campo plan? Okay. Yeah, well, and this is Texas, and that is a fight we have been engaged in for a very long time. I guess the fact that there is even 10% for pedestrian and bikeways is due to the fact that the federal government requires that a certain portion of the traffic project funds be invested in that. I don't think that's nearly a high enough percentage. We each had not quite $2 million to spend in our districts for bike safety and safe walks to school projects that came from the failure of Project Connect last year. You may remember that. And I rolled out a list after talking with members, residents in District 7, working with staff and also my knowledge of my district, those areas of town that really need some help, primarily walkways to school, crossing areas. I think there's one area where we'll be able to put a hybrid beacon. You all know what the hybrid pedestrian beacons are. they're pretty expensive too. I was surprised how expensive they are, and also bikeways. So the Mobility Committee will be looking at these local small projects, small bore projects in February, I believe, and then we'll be voting on them. It's just a drop in the bucket. And the only reason we did it was because we had this one-time funding because Project Connect had not passed at the polls, and that money was specifically to be used for pedestrian and bicycle purposes. So we'll be working on that. The larger answer to your question, Phil, is I think a concerted effort from the community. As always, it's the same question I ask about SH45 Southwest. What can we do to stop it? What can we do to change the thinking of the people who are making those decisions? And they tend to be either at governmental levels above the city council, or they are not really governmental entities in the way that we recognize them. The CTRMA is an appointed body, but it has tremendous political power and influence. And one way to get in on that is, one way to leverage our influence is to work with the surrounding communities where those appointees and those elected officials who are appointed to those bodies do have a voice. And if we can talk with people in the elected officials in Hayes, Caldwell, and Bastrop, which is already underway, and I know the mayor is looking at this as well as the Mobility Committee, maybe we'll make some progress on it. Changing that approach in Texas is really hard. And now that they have so much money, since we passed the change to last fall, we voted to send additional money for transportation projects in the state, and that's just an open checkbook for TxDOT to do these projects. I wish I had more concrete suggestions for you, but I just don't.
Oh, yes. I was going to say that Austin can understand global awareness and combat greenhouse gases best by the Mobility Committee requiring better conduct from Capital Metro drivers, because they regularly park their buses on the side of the road to take personal breaks when it's loaded with paid-up passengers. And the Mobility Committee, City Council, has to get on them and require the drivers within Austin city limits to not do that. Dallas and Houston already prohibit this. There needs to be a city ordinance. The Austin police need to come after them and take them away, take them off to jail, because, no, I'm serious. Water, they have breaks, but they don't cut off service just because the person needs to take a break. Same with electricity. I'm sure somebody's taking a break right now. You're going to get more people on those buses and lower emissions on the road if you do that.
Thanks, Robin. I agree. It sounds like the management and personnel policies at Cap Metro need a review. I would be happy to pass those comments along to folks so that they take them to Cap Metro. And I think you probably all can send emails to Cap Metro and let them know that you think that there should be better application of breaks. If indeed that is happening, then they should look at that and make some changes.
Hi, I'm David Ward. I'm a 13-year resident of Crestview. And my question to you stems from a lot of stuff going on locally. It's unfortunate in my mind, but a word I think can solve a lot of our problems. The word density seems to be a dirty word in our neighborhoods. In my mind, it can solve a lot of things on the climate and the environment level. It can reduce our reliance on cars and promote public transportation. But as a resident of those neighborhoods, which are the old Austin suburbs, really, and are now part of the Central Corridor, density is looked on as a dirty word, and I would like to know your opinion and what your thoughts are on how density can help solve all of these problems we're talking. Even watering, how that can solve all of these problems.
Thank you. I don't know about density being a dirty word. I certainly don't see it that way. District 7 is entering into a corridor study on Burnett Road and Anderson Lane, and there's some very intentional and deliberative conversations going on along that corridor as to which areas should be further densified and how deep along the corridor they should be. I think the point from my perspective, is where is that done? Do we have transit in the area that can service it? Is Cat Metro able to expand their operating routes in order to better serve the people in the denser areas of the city? I would actually say that Austin is a heck of a lot denser than it was when I moved here in 1980, and I suspect that curve up on the densification of the city will just continue. So we need to manage how that is handled, and I would just say it's not a dirty word.
This question is about COP21, and I understood you to say that it's not really official until it's ratified by 55 countries. So I was wondering, is that at risk? Is there a chance the U.S. will be one of those countries, and is there something we should be doing to advocate for that?
My understanding is coming out of the conference, there was so much agreement that that should happen. They do have their processes in place, and we need to allow them to play out. The two countries that were most likely to vote no or to put up obstacles were India and China. And I know from reading that I had done on my way over to the conference, although I didn't meet with any of the officials from China or from India for that matter, that they were also working toward reducing the greenhouse emissions. And you know that I think it's in Beijing, they've had some really bad polluted air recently, just in the past few weeks, and they've had to close schools. So I think that whether people maybe philosophically don't believe something is happening when they go outside and they can barely breathe and their children are sick and people have asthma, then that's a wake-up call, like a physical wake-up call. So I think we will wait and see. I continue to be really optimistic about it all. This isn't a golden bullet, or the silver bullet, I guess. The bullets are silver. It's not a silver bullet, but if we didn't make these changes, we would be so far behind the curve. One of the criticisms of the Paris Agreement is that there are no penalties. I actually see that as not a negative. Because we want the countries to participate. We want it to come from the heart and the soul. We want the change to come from all of us so that we're all bound into that agreement and with our hearts and our minds. So we'll wait and see. April 22nd in New York City is when it opens, and I think all of us will follow that carefully and hope for the best, and I think we'll get there.
I believe Leslie Poole has left some materials back here that are available to anyone who wants them. Is that right?
Please help yourself. There's some bags. This is all courtesy of Austin Resource Recovery. We are engaged in a citywide competition on recycling in each of the districts, and districts that do the most or show the most increase in recycling will win a competition and get a nice chunk of change to do some projects specifically within each district. So no matter where you live in the city, this benefits us all.
We have a question from Richard Halpin.
Councilmember, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for all the terrific work you do on the council. You are chair, I think, of the Open Spaces and the Climate Change Committee of the council, and you're also co-chair of the Austin Energy Council.
Correct.
Is that right? So in your early remarks today, you mentioned a potential gas plant. Would you talk to us for a few minutes about fossil fuels, and are they good for the environment? Are they good for us? And what's coming up with this coal plant? What's this all about?
Sure. Thanks, Richard. I think we are all well educated into the negative effects of gas emissions and what it does to the ozone layer. I found a really interesting little video that was posted, and I think it may have been on Meyer's website. It talks about the effects of the uptick in carbon emissions on the layer of ozone that protects the planet. And you can see, and it's done in a way that your children and grandchildren can get an early understanding of what's going on. And I'm not the scientist, but I understand it has to do with both thickening the atmosphere so that the heat can't escape. And then I remember there was a time when we were concerned about holes in the ozone layer I think up at the Arctic and the North Pole. My daughter had the opportunity to travel to Iceland and Sweden in November, and she picked up concerns just as, a 27-year-old on a holiday from people who live in those northern areas about the ice melt and how their cities will be absolutely affected. We'll see that here in the States. You've seen those time-lapse videos and graphics that show that a lot of Florida is inundated. Our coastline creeps up closer to Austin. And I don't know if you read the reports that the El Nino brought a 50-degree increase in temperature that hit the northern very top of the world just, I think, about 10 days ago. And 50 degrees raised the average temperature, which was about 20 degrees below zero, up to 30. So it was a huge overnight change and really bad news, especially at this time of year. So we've got a lot of ramifications that are coming down, and they're coming down at a much faster pace. So to the extent that you're able to educate people in your family and your neighborhoods, please talk to them about the smaller things that we can do on a local basis, which is the recycling and not driving as much, using public transportation, biking, and walking. And on the larger canvas, we need to work with our counterparts in other municipalities about renewable energy and not building the large polluting plants like the combined cycle gas plant that Austin is looking at. One last thing I will say about Austin Energy, Larry Weiss, the executive director or the head of that department, left for Portland, which is where he's from, or Seattle, I'm sorry, it was Seattle, not Portland. And so he's gone back to the town where he's from, and so the city is right now looking to recruit or to hire a new head of Austin Energy. It's a hugely important position. And I hope as Vice Chair of the Austin Energy Committee to be following that process really, really closely. And I talked with the city manager about including stakeholders in that process as well. We need to have y'all's voices.
Hi, this is Matt Traub. I was wondering briefly, related to the point you just made on driving less, how your support for reduced emissions is going to affect specific votes on housing projects within Central Austin, because I sat down and did some rough numbers last night, and one person, there's 100 people roughly moving to Austin every day, and their jobs are primarily within Central Austin, and somebody commuting 25 miles each way from Round Rock is putting several hundred additional tons of CO2 per person in the air versus somebody commuting 5 miles within Central Austin. So given the importance of reduced driving, I'm wondering if this is going to affect your votes to support more housing within Central Austin.
Sure. Well, my job, when I was moving, the most recent move that I make, my goal was to live as close to where I work as I possibly could. At the time, I could afford to make that move. Unfortunately, that is not necessarily the case for everyone. I'm not talking about the people who are coming to Austin, because they're generally coming to Austin for some pretty nice salaries, but people like us in this room who may or may not have had salaries over $150,000 or $100,000 or even $75,000 a year. And we're finding that the cost of our homes, or to buy a new home centrally, is really expensive. And then we have our property taxes. So obviously the answer to that is try to live as close to where you work as possible. We need to work with Capital Metro to increase the frequency and the routes, the schedules and the frequency. When I was campaigning a year ago, I talked about having hubs around the city that are areas where people work. The city is doing some of that in encouraging the location of some of these larger campuses to be outside the central part of the city. This is Texas. If you can tell me how to get people out of their cars when it is honestly their decision, we can have and do have a lot of municipal policies. My personal philosophy is to drive less and bike and walk more, but I cannot get everybody out of their cars. What we can do as policymakers is increase the schedule and frequency of the transportation, make it reliable and predictable, try to encourage development of work areas outside of central parts of town so we can diffuse the travel. People make choices on where they live. It is not my job to tell them where to live. I can help with approving development in certain parts of town when developers bring it to us, and I have to balance that off of the larger concerns of the community as well. There are many moving parts to zoning decisions, and it may seem simple on the surface, but I can tell you from having worked on them very closely from council that they're very complex, and they affect people at all kinds of levels and in many, many ways that you may not even imagine. And also from the 37 years that I've lived in this community and watched it grow from the sleepy little college town it was when I got here in 1980.
We have a question from Douglas Bauer.
Around a year ago, I spent a couple weeks working in a small town in southern Germany on business. And it was a small city of about 250,000 people. In the center of town, they had a train station connected to the regional rail lines. And that train station is also the hub of their local light rail system and a lot of their buses. This is something that can be done in a town much smaller than Austin in another country. My question to you is, what is the current vision of the City Council in terms of mass transit going forward?
Thank you.
I think we'll be talking about rail line and resuscitating that out. Those conversations are already out there. There has not been a plan yet coordinated or brought to the council. Generally, I support transit. I take it when I can. When I was in Paris, I took the metro. And I used to ride my bike to work. I really can't anymore. I don't have the amount of time, and I don't have the ability to take a shower whenever I get to where I'm going. But if I could change that about what I do, I would change that and get back to how I used to commute myself. You know, when I look at why Austin is so reluctant to invest in a big way, to put the money out there on any number of projects, light rail is only one of them. We had the courthouse last fall. If we have a transportation bond, it will be hundreds of millions of dollars. I sat on the City of Austin Bond Advisory Committee in 2012. We had $2 billion worth of projects that came from staff. When the city manager was done culling through them, they were a total of $1 billion. And by the time the committee got the projects, we were told that by council that we needed to keep the 2012 bond package under $400 million. So you can see just by the numbers, without even enumerating all of the projects, how much was left on the table. That stuff hasn't been done. You know, those projects that we didn't get in 2012 are still out there. So when I look at Austin and our reluctance to invest, it even goes to the school district. I believe there was a school district bond that failed not too long ago to build more schools and to improve the schools, which really stunned me because I've always voted for those packages. And then I look at Austin, and then I look at the large cities that have intact metro systems that are really state-of-the-art. When I go to New York City to visit my daughter, we ride the subway. When Will and I travel to Portland or Seattle, we take the train from the airport. And then in Chicago also has a subway. So where I was going with all of that was these cities began many years ago, hundreds of years before Austin. I mean, in 1840, Austin was just a little cow town on the banks of a flooding river. We didn't make the investment in the infrastructure that even New York in 1840 had already made. There were people of wealth who also had a sense of community philanthropy. They were going to make a lot of money from it too. But they went in and they laid the infrastructure, the hard infrastructure that Austin has never done. Do I think we will ever get there? I think we may. I would like to talk in a larger community conversation about the philanthropic muscle that people who come to Austin and make money here and whether they are giving back to our community in substantial legacy level ways. If you are developing in Austin, It's not only about the city council saying yes to your development so that you can make a big profit. What are you doing to give back to this community in tangible ways so that when you finish building whatever your apartment complex is or your new office complex, what is left behind other than that building? This is a conversation we have not had in this city in any large way. And I think it's really important. Some of the people that I met last year who are doing developments in town, who are building high-rise office buildings downtown, they're young. They're about my daughter's age. They're making a tremendous profit from Austin. And so my question to them is, when you're done building and you're cashing those checks, what about the good that you've gotten for yourself personally are you giving back to this community in the way of real concrete legacy benefits that bring value to our community? Because the value is more than just that building there. It's got to be in our parkland. It's got to be in our libraries. It's got to be in a first-class transportation system. So I think that if we can start talking about it that way, and if the city can make itself more open to possibilities and project potentialities, maybe we can change how some of these projects are funded, and maybe we'll have the really great city. You hear the mayor talk about great cities do great things, and I think this is what he's talking about, is we have to think in a larger way, and everybody needs to give back to the community, not just those of us who are in this room here today, because I know many of you have toiled in these fields for many, many years. And we've all been there together. But the folks who are newly coming to Austin, they're here because this is an awesome city. And we need to keep it that way. And they have a role to play in helping us maintain what's so special about this city.
We have a question here.
My name is Bob Hendricks. I'm curious if, as you've looked at energy utility options, if you've looked at carbon capture and storage, capturing the CO2 before it leaves the smokestack, and if so, what your conclusions have been about it.
You know, I haven't specifically. That's a really good question. I would hope that those smokestacks would, if they don't have the scrubbers and filters on them, that they would go away, and we would find other ways to generate whatever the energy is. But I'd be happy to talk with you more specifically about what you're referring to, and then see what research is out there and what the city has done. And I have only been in office for a year. There's a whole lot yet to learn about this city, but I will tell you how much I love serving in this capacity. And I don't know if you have any more questions, but I would just be happy to thank all of you for being here today.
We have about 9 minutes remaining.
Michael Walsh.
Hi, Mike.
A lot of the discussion today seems to be focusing around Capital Metro, so I wanted to comment on that. I think, given all the difficulties we've had with getting more light rail, for that $1.2 billion that was going to be got by bonds being issued, the electric buses have arrived. The technology is very well developed. You have 10-minute fast charging capabilities, and in Ontario, California, there's a company that makes mid-size electric buses called Phoenix Motor Cars. I mean, you'd be so much better off with buses like that that require virtually no maintenance and that could come much more frequently and get rid of these dinosaur 40-foot diesel buses. So.
That sounds like a good plan.
We have a question here. You've been waiting patiently. Would you stand and say your name?
Oh, okay. Yes, no problem. Hi. Thanks for coming. My name's Tom Wald. I really appreciate your service, and I appreciate your environmental record. Regarding transportation, this is something that I think is not so evident to most people, but we actually heavily subsidize cars in our city by providing free parking, mandating free parking. That, in effect, actually subsidizes climate change. We require, when we're building a new building for residences, it can be up to like $40,000 per parking space. the city of Boston still requires mandatory parking, and what I see is that actually ends up facilitating climate change. Sure. You're a huge. Climate change is very important to you, I understand. And so I guess what I want to get at is that we're subsidizing to the tunes of tens of millions of dollars. The city is mandating this parking. I just think that we can't wait another generation. We can't wait another 5 years. Like right now, why don't we end parking subsidies? And I want to know if that's something that you would support.
Well, the city currently, and when I worked at the county as well, had policies to give bus passes and to encourage bicycling. They were building facilities so people could shower. We talk with new companies that come into town about reducing the number of cars on the road. It's those companies' decisions, primarily because they're private, on how they want to operate. We can, again, as I said earlier, we can use the power of our positions to demonstrate as good role models the kind of actions that we'd like to see taken. I think it would be an interesting debate to have at council, the things that you highlight there, whether to do away with all parking downtown and to require everybody to either take a bus or walk or bike. I think that would be a really interesting conversation to listen to from my colleagues on the council. My personal opinion on all of this is I support all of that. Generally speaking, I do think it's good to get cars off the road, and I work at doing that myself personally, encourage others to do it. Not everybody is able to do that. People who have disabilities, people who have children. As a mom with a daughter in grade school who had multiple places to be after school, piano lessons, gymnastics, brownies, I couldn't take her on a bike to get to all the places she needed to go to. The city was developed in a central node with suburbs ringing it. If the city fathers back in 1840 had been maybe more visionary, they could have changed how the fabric of this city was set down. But that isn't how things developed here. I think that it's a good action for the city to encourage the changes that you're talking about, and I would be interested to see after the debate on council if we could roll out some additional policies toward the end over time, because the things that you're talking about can't happen overnight. But I think there's nothing wrong with talking about what you're talking about.
We have a question from our Forum Committee co-chair, Leslie Kearns.
Just a quick question. I know there's still some other questioners who are hoping to get an answer in, but I wanted to ask you about the huge developments that are being planned, both the BCRC and at 45th Street and the Austin Oaks, which can tremendously affect the Far West area.
They're both PUDs and planned unit developments. The requirements on those are that the city gives concessions to the developers on these large developments as long as they make superior developments. And then there are some guidelines on what constitutes superiority. On both of them, the Austin Oaks PUD, that plan was pulled down, and they have a new development team working on that. And on the Bull Creek Road property, I was deeply involved in the Bull Creek Road Coalition when we first heard that the state was going to sell that land. And we brought together an affiliation of 7 adjacent neighborhoods to talk about what our vision was for that almost 80 acres of land that have been basically pristine and not developed on ever. And now it's in the hands of the folks who bought the land, and they're working their vision through the various departments of the city. It hasn't yet come to the council. We're hoping that all of the pieces are in place before the council has anything to review. So I don't know when that will happen, but I do know that staff and the developers and the neighbors are working very diligently on all aspects of that.
Thank you. We're talking about transportation and people not willing to get out of their cars. There's a whole lot we can do even if they are in their cars. The city of Austin still buys vehicles that are not partial zero emission vehicles. We have a police department that I begged to buy low emission vehicles. I got nowhere with that. There are thousands of plug-in vehicles in the city right now, and we still need more public charging. So there are a lot of solutions that would even though people are not willing to get out of their car, we could surely reduce our emissions. And I think the city should commit itself not to buy any more vehicles unless they're partial zero emission vehicles.
I agree, Dale, and that's a really good point. And thanks for reminding me of that. During the budget last year, the head of our fleet department rolled out his plan over a number of budget years to acquire low emission and electric vehicles. And part of the climate plan for the city of Austin is that all of our vehicles are electric vehicles. And with the proliferation of them now, I think that that will be an easier goal to attain, maybe even sooner. Problem there is how much it costs. And so it always goes back to the dollar and the decisions on how this council chooses to allocate the funds. I support the plan to change over all of the fleet to electric, and I hope to see more progress on that next year. I think, frankly, the plan for Austin Resource Recovery to have a remanufacturing hub in the city rather than trucking all of that waste outside of town, because right now we're taking it down to San Antonio, that's an extraordinary waste, and so that will change, assuming that we can continue to go forward on that and that the critics of it don't waylay it. Many of the things that we can do here in the city, and if I haven't sufficiently answered the transportation questions for y'all, it takes time. And, you know, I think it was, wasn't it the president who was talking about gun control last week? And he said that real change takes time. It took time for civil rights bill to pass. It didn't happen overnight. Affirmative action didn't happen overnight. Marriage equality didn't happen overnight. But they did happen, and there's the hope. And that is what I would leave you with on all of these topics, because I'm just one, and I do the best that I can to support the vision and the goals of the people in District 7 and all of the city. But I think, again, as Helen Keller said, you know, one person doing it alone isn't very much. But when we combine all our efforts, we can make real change.
And Leslie, thank you for your talk today, your forward-looking leadership, and I think you've inspired all of us. Thanks for sharing your time with us. Let's give her a big hand.
Thank you.
And
thank you. Thank you.